Hey guys, Leanna here. It's Mountain Monday. You know what to do. Breathe in and out. And breathe in and out. First Mountain Monday in a long time I've been able to do the breathing properly. Hallelujah. But it's a bit of a melancholy Mountain Monday. First of all, I realized how cool would it be if I could get Mountain Dew to sponsor Mountain Mondays? Because then it would be Mountain Dew Mondays. It would be perfect branding. Wouldn't go at all with the theme of Zen because Mountain Dew is full of caffeine. But wouldn't that be cool in terms of getting paid? That would be nice. And it's the gamer thing. I came up with this idea because I Googled Gamer Mountain and just got a bunch of Mountain Dew stuff. And I thought, hey, this would actually be a good branded tie in. And the reason I did that is because this was the first weekend in about 2 years on Twitter that wasn't made of anger and insanity. And by insanity, I mean sort of that Lovecraftian, I will swallow your soul. Not the actual mental health issue. But it was a good weekend on Twitter. It was a bunch of us just talking about games. And that was really cool. And I'm like, I have missed this. I have missed just having conversations about games not driven by politics or not driven by, some sort of analytical perspective or backed up by facts. It was just a bunch of us going, hey, I liked this about Fallout 4, and I didn't like this so much, and these parts were fun, and these parts weren't so fun, and just our experiences with games. And I mean, part of the reason I love RPGs and talking to other people who play RPGs is I'm very interested in the choices they made and how they related to various characters. There's no wrong answers. I mean, the whole idea of is that people are going to make different choices. And I love those conversations because I think it's a bonding experience in a way. You learn a lot about somebody. And like I said, there are no wrong answers. It's not good game, bad game. It's I liked it or I didn't like it or I liked it overall. But, and they were just really good conversations. But then I talked to too many people who still feel sort of demonized in the greater world for being a gamer and the connection, the negative connotations that the gamer identity still has. And I know there's been a fresh round of, DMCA controversies and all that stuff. I quite honestly don't understand why anyone would DMCA a video at this point, other than if somebody's actually ripping you off, like if they're taking your music and they didn't ask, or they're taking your video footage and they didn't ask, and they're not adding anything to it, they're including it as part of their stuff. And obviously, I mean, I'm talking outside the fair use clause, then yes, absolutely exercise that right. That's what it's for. But a lot of people are using DMCA claims to mute criticism of them, and it never works that way. I don't even know how you'd even file a DMCA claim on YouTube. I've never done it. I hate the menus in YouTube. I hate the interface in YouTube. I can upload things and occasionally edit things and add captions, and I hate going through submenus and submenus and submenus to find things I need. So I don't even know how that process works. I've been on the receiving end and tried to make a case that it was fair use and I was critiquing something, but YouTube said no, and that was the end of it. And that was actually the video I did on Joss Whedon and the Avengers that got DMCA'd. That was very funny. They didn't take the video down completely. They just stripped the monetization. They didn't strip the monetization. They rerouted the monetization to, I guess it's Disney. So the movie company made all the money off the ads on that video. Disney is one of the most aggressive I've found in terms of corporations with DMCA. I stopped covering Disney Infinity on my YouTube channel because all the music gets DMCA'd by bot. So if you're wondering why I haven't done as much Toys to Life stuff this cycle, that's part of the reason why, is I can't make any money off of it. And a little bit of money is better than no money at all. YouTube's monetization sucks, but you know, I don't get sponsored for this stuff. If I ever receive anything, I would declare it. Most of the time, I'm just doing it because I love games and I love gamers. And, so I'm not here to make money for other people. But this idea of the demonization of the gamer identity, it makes me really sad that are still so affected by this. And I realize that this is one of those things in gaming that because I'm not the perception, I'm othered by the term gamer, because the whole girl gamer thing, which I can't stand. I'm just a gamer. I'm not a girl gamer. I'm just a gamer. There's nothing inherently different about me, because saying I'm a girl gamer means that gamers aren't girls. And I disagree with that. I think a gamer is anybody who is an enthusiast about video games. I don't think it is by default male. I don't think it is by default white, and, we don't go around going, Asian gamer, Indian gamer, Chinese gamer, black gamer, or the more politically correct African American gamer. But that sounds weird in Canada because we're not American. If we were, our money would be worth more and our beer would be weaker. But, everybody's just a gamer. And this concept that gamers are by default white and male is hurting a lot of people. And I started sort of digging in and thinking about, based on the numerous conversations I've had, why this is upsetting people. And I came to some interesting conclusions. I'll be doing something else, and all of a sudden something will hit me. It's like, boom, oh, a piece will fall into place. And it's like, well, that's why that's happening. Oh, that's cool. And what I realized is that people who love games want everybody else to play games as much as they do. And they don't want, women being afraid to get involved in gaming. They don't want minorities to be afraid of getting involved in gaming. This is what I've heard over and over and over again. The reason they go after certain people so hard, the reason they go after the negative PR surrounding video games so hard is because they're afraid that people will turn away from the products they love. I hear that more and more nowadays than they're going to take away our games. There is some of that. They're going to change games and make them less interesting. But I'm hearing a lot of, we don't want people afraid to love video games as much as we do. And I'm sure some people are struggling right now with the disconnect between that, very, very noble, very warm motivation and the stuff they see on the internet. And yet you have to remember that a lot of the internet, the trolling, or what people call shit posting, these things are forms of performance tied, unfortunately, to the medium. Some parts of the internet, you will get a lot more of that than others. You get, overall a lot more shit posting on message boards and image boards and Twitter than you'll get on something like Facebook. And I personally find shitposting somewhat annoying. It's much like, I don't know if people are aware of the office place phenomenon called waffling, that you leave your computer open, and so somebody goes in there and sends an email to the whole building saying, I like orange juice and waffles or something like that. It's like, ha ha ha, you left your computer open. And that can be funny in certain circumstances, used sparingly. But the thing about working with any media company is one of the things I don't tell you about media is the people who work in media are probably the least cool, most desperate for attention people you will ever meet. It's very, very rare to meet a legitimately cool person in media. Why? Because everybody's constantly afraid for their jobs and trying to desperately fit into workplace culture because it's so it's so tenuous. There's really no way to measure whether a piece of media is more worthwhile than another. You can measure ratings, but some people say critical acclaim is just as important as ratings. And then there's the whole mandate of the channel and the brand they're trying to build. So at any point, you can be swept away with regime change. And so you don't get very many authentic people in media. And so once this waffling thing started, everybody started doing it. And so you got all this junk in your inbox of just people waffling each other. And, managers would waffle their staff. And it was always much funnier when a staff waffled a manager, like a staffer waffled a manager than when a manager walked in and waffled somebody that works for them. But it just got so prevalent that it wasn't funny anymore. And it used to drive me crazy just because of sheer email volume. And it just felt like, okay, this was funny when it happened every so often. And this was funny when people were clever about it. But it just became this thing that everybody did. And it just felt like going through the motions after a while. And that's how I feel about shit posting on the internet as well. There are some times it is incredibly funny. And I think it's really cool to know that, somebody manages their own Twitter account. And so they'll get goofy and start sending silly things when they're out with friends or just for a laugh or, when they're drunk or something like that. I personally like that about Twitter. I think it shows that a person is authentic and well-rounded and self-confident enough to be more than a brand, that they're actually prepared to be a person in public. And I think that's really important. But it gets overdone, and when people have specific accounts just to shitpost, why would anybody bother to have a conversation with you? We can't take anything you say seriously. You're a shitposter. It's a waste of time. It's like talking to the wall, where the wall spews profanity back at you. Why would anybody do that? Those are the sorts of things that I think people get into a culture, especially internet culture, and it's not even a question of feeling accepted. It's a question of not being rejected. And that's how rigid our social hierarchies are. It's not even about acceptance anymore. It's about, you can't kick me out. And that makes me really sad because just, not being thrown out is not enough to feel accepted and secure and build self-esteem on. That's not a friendship. That's mutual aggrieved tolerance. And people deserve better than that. But people expect no better than that. They don't expect to be accepted or welcome. They expect to be tolerated. And that's led to a real culture of distrust on the internet. And a lot of people longing for community and longing for acceptance and not getting it, even though, the internet has this amazing power to allow us to reach out and broaden the scope of the people we meet and, hopefully find more like-minded people because we're not as, boxed in by geography anymore. But very few people are their true selves or even their best selves on the internet. They're what they think is the most socially acceptable or profitable self. And that's very different because your best self does things when it's appropriate that are not popular, but they're right. Your most popular self doesn't do that. And the real measure of a person is somebody who sticks to their convictions even when it's hard. And I mean, I'm not talking about the, the silly stuff that, say, Bill Maher is doing right now, where he's just openly Islamophobic and he's getting reward for it. That's not hard for him. That is something he has been building towards for many, many years. It's part of his brand. It's got him a following. He's actually benefiting from his Islamophobia. And it is Islamophobia, blaming all Muslims, blaming the religion of Islam itself for the actions of extremists who don't even walk the walk of Islam every day of their lives. You can't blame a book for what people do with it. And I have a real issue with that because of, things like what happened to Catcher in the Rye, or, various songs that were tied to assassinations or shootings, and the work got banned. And I mean, these books or songs or things like that don't actually incite anybody to go out and kill anybody, but because they were connected to it, they're pushed aside and they're disappeared, instead of examining what happened in that person's head to make them think that a work of art or a work of fiction was telling you to go out and do anything harmful to any other human being. And, you know, so no matter what, no matter whether I agree with something or not, I can disagree with something and I can say, get that thing out of my face, but saying, get that thing out of my face and get that thing off shelves is a very different request, isn't it? And I know this is rare. It's a hard position to take. You have to be very self-assured, and you have to feel very sort of secure to say, it's not for me, but I don't mind if other people read it or play it or watch it or and there's no way we can possibly consume all the media that's out there. So, do I care if people play a Dead or Alive game? No. I mean, at this point, I'd review the game and I'd be fair to the game. I'd judge the game on its merits. But then the problem is when you go and you start trying to go, well, all right, I have no problem with this thing existing, but here's why I dispute, what's the word I'm even looking for? Because we know the stuff isn't harmful, right? Or at least there's no proof yet. The jury's still out on sexism. The preliminary evidence has said no, sexist games do not cause sexist thinking. And we know that violent games don't cause violent behavior. So I think what people are just, looking for is the ability to avoid content they don't find entertaining, and the ability to have access to content that is an alternative that they do find entertaining. That's really what we're talking about, right? In the broadening of choice in terms of what kind of games are available in the mass market. And I really don't think that this screaming and this blocking and this banning and this, call outs and subtweeting and all this stuff, I don't think that's getting us where we need to go. It just seems to me like there's a lot of hurt feelings. And I mean, the reason I don't think that's the way we need to go is, let's face it, we've been trying this for going on 2 years now. It's not working. We're not getting there, right? We're not moving the needle in the right direction. And I think it's also that people come to games for safe emotional experiences, and by emotional experience I don't mean high drama, I mean something as simple as fun. Play is very different from work, and people come to games to play. Unfortunately, with all this sociological criticism and with all this problematic and pernicious and all that stuff, the stuff we do for play is starting to feel like work. We can't turn off our analytical brains while we're playing these products because they're overthought now. And I can understand why people get angry because you're taking away their happy when you do that. And I think, that's important to mind, and it's important to keep in mind when things like games or any entertainment medium is discussed outside of academia, when it's discussed in a populist medium like YouTube or like sort of the internet in general. And I'm not talking about, the paper download services like JSTOR or anything like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, you make a video on YouTube or you make a video on a website. You have to remember that this isn't a sociology course. This isn't an anthropology course. This isn't a film lit course. This isn't critique from an academic perspective. This is populist. And you have to keep in mind not just the audience, but the format you're dealing in, and be a bit more gentle, because people don't want to accept, they're going to reject at first the idea that something that makes them feel good is bad. And so, I think it's important to be clear when you're saying, it's not that it's bad. It's just, I've played 20 games like this and I'd like something different, please. I'm bored. I'm tired of seeing this same thing over and over and over again. I'm tired of the military shooter, not because I think military shooters are bad, but because we had 50 of them, And that is really what I think most people are trying to say. Now, there are people who do think that, Grand Theft Auto is going to lead to the downfall of society. And the reason I don't think that, even though I personally find the games the opposite of fun, and the reason I find the games the opposite of fun is I don't think they deal with the realities of crime at all. They make me think of the neighborhood, I grew up in, and the people who are still there. And I'm sitting here thinking, if somebody made a game about what it was actually like to grow up that way, I would be right into it. I'd be captivated, compelled. But it doesn't. It doesn't. It's a fictionalized version of crime that doesn't actually create any empathy for the people that have to live in those neighborhoods. And, the closest I've actually played in a game to the actual people who live in those neighborhoods, and I know there were problems with it, and I know that people are really down on this franchise, but Watch Dogs, the gang member hacker character in Watch Dogs, I thought the fact that he had the grandmother and all that stuff, I thought that was just like that was a more insider take to my experiences growing up in a neighborhood like that. I really thought that that was well handled. And it's really important, I think, when we're criticizing games, to be able to see the good as well as the bad. If you can't say one good thing about a game, you've lost perspective, because most games, that are made have one good thing you can say about them. They have strengths and weaknesses. And I think that's the same about the people who play them. Are there some absolute assholes that play video games? Yeah, for sure, But most people who play video games, and that was Momo sneezing, most people who play video games are really good people who may not be the best communicators or the most, charismatic people, or they may be suffering from depression. And the thing about depression that a lot of people, if you haven't had depression, don't really understand, is that there's sort of this barrier of anger that you have to work through, and you get it on the way down. You get angry as sort of a self-defense mechanism, and you can't be angry anymore, so you end up getting depressed. And it's almost like a water line. To come out of that depression, you have to pass back through that barrier of anger, that event horizon around the black hole. And that's not pleasant for the people around you. But that is the path. That is, reentry. And there's a lot of heat on reentry. And so, I see a lot of that on the internet, that people just, there's a lot of what appears to be aggression, but it's really just people who have never been taught. And it is a skill. It's an active skill, establishing personal boundaries, like effective personal boundaries. It's a skill that can be taught, and a lot of people haven't learned it. And a lot of people who grow up in poverty don't learn how to set boundaries. And so there's a lot of anger because they constantly feel taken advantage of. That's the, mentality of poverty. And people who grew up wealthy, even if they don't get along with their parents, even though they think their parents never really gave them anything, the reality is just growing up with money protected you from that. You are more able to set your own boundaries. You have more agency and more control over your surroundings just because you were given that establishment when you were young. Your view on the world is exceptionally different. And, poverty isn't about race. It isn't about gender. It's anybody can be poor. And there's a difference between the relative poverty we see in the West and the absolute poverty that we see in other places in the world. And that's also important to distinguish. But I really wonder whether a lot of this culture war in gaming, it just seems to be like a lot of trust fund babies fighting with middle class and lower class people caught in the middle. And I know people who will say, if you've got an Xbox, you can't be that bad off. And no one who says that grew up in the projects, because the number of big screen TVs in, government housing is, it didn't make sense to me at first because we didn't have one. We did not have, we had a black and white TV in the mid 1980s. Okay. And my parents just wouldn't spend money on that stuff. But other people, I finally realized, you don't have the money to go out. You don't have the money to go to the movies. You don't have the money to go to theater or plays so people get television. And yeah, they spend money that they don't have on these massive TVs because it was anyway the cheapest form of entertainment out there. And part of the poverty is not using money effectively, but it's a psychological thing. That TV takes them away for a while, and they can't do it through films, and they can't do it through, you can't go and sit at a Starbucks if you can't afford that $5 every time you have a coffee. And it's, people think that's strange, and it's really not that strange if you've seen it, in action. And those are the sorts of things I think that don't get discussed when we talk about inequalities and, the dreaded term social justice. But how does this tie back into gamers? Well, I think there's a lot of gamers. I mean, the people I talk to who are really the most sort of passionate about this are also not necessarily in the best economic circumstances. And I don't think that's an accident either. I think that the people who care very much about these things are because it gives them a sense of validation that the rest of the world doesn't give them. And that's completely fair. I mean, you have to listen well enough to hear that with people, right? And I think that for all people go, games are expensive. You can't be poorly off if you play a lot of video games. Well, some people pirate, which I don't advocate. I buy games. And other people, they'll buy these massive open world games, and spend 300 hours in them, which actually gives you a lot more bang for your buck than going to a 2.5 hour movie for, whatever amount of money it is near you. So these are the things that aren't talked about because we have this perception of privilege among gamers, and it's got to stop. We have to take the identity politics out of the gamer identity because it's inaccurate, and because it's hurting people, and because, just when you think about it, it's hurting people who aren't white men because we're not white men. And it's hurting people who are white men because it's a deliberate negative connotation attached to white men. And that's not fair either. If somebody is lower class, if somebody is poor, it doesn't matter if they're white. I mean, it does matter in terms of you can hide, you know, you can put on a nice suit and get your teeth fixed and people won't necessarily know you came from that. But I just want to send a message to gamers that I have heard you, and the internet always makes things seem worse than it really is. And if you can get into the world, or just have one-on-one conversations instead of stuff on Twitter, where like take it to DMs and have a good one-on-one conversation or small groups, it feels a lot better than a conversation that anybody can jump into, because that's when you get the people who think it's funny to shit post on a conversation. And like I said, it's funny in small doses, but it's overused. But yeah, please have one-on-one conversations, and don't the entire world based on Twitter, because every study that comes out of social networking indicates that social networks aren't a good reflection of reality. And so I'm going to close off there and hope that helps some people who are feeling kind of down, because it's the holidays and that can be difficult for people too. But I'd like to hear your feedback. I'd like to hear, you know, what you're looking for from gaming, what you'd like to see improved. And try to keep the comments positive. Try to just talk about your own experience instead of dumping on somebody else's, because that completely defeats the purpose of this exercise. But I am sort of interested in what people look for from games, and what the fighting and what this, you know, who games are for question has, you know, it's hit a nerve. And I'm continuing to understand more and more why. So, you know, my YouTube commenters are overall great. So I can have these dialogues with people. And I'm very happy about that. I mean, that's a major accomplishment. It's people claim it can't be done, and people are still claiming that it can't be done on YouTube or anything else with comments. But it can be done. And we're showing it can be done. So let's close out. We're going to breathe in. And out. And breathe in. And out.